All right. Well, I wanted to start this with Jessica, but it looks like she might have, in all my troubleshooting trying to get this thing to work, she might have gone upstairs and gone to bed. So it's May 22nd, 2016, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about my grandma, Judy Brown, who's my dad's father, or my dad's mother, pardon me. Um, on so today's Sunday. On Tuesday, we found out that Grandma had a major stroke, apparently a really bad one. Which was such a surprise. Grandma's had a bit of, onset dementia where she kind of has forgotten she forgets about simple little things. She'd be sitting down next to you and be like, "Now, what's your name again?" Things like that. But besides that, been in relatively good health every time we see her. So it came at quite a shock. After talking to Grandpa, it appears that she had some trouble getting up out of her bed, and one morning to go use the bathroom and let Dwayne know that, hey, I can't get up, and he thought, oh, maybe it's just need to get her blood flowing or something like that. Went in to get a couple things, came back in, and she had fallen back on her bed and wasn't moving, so he proceeded to call the ambulance. And that's when they took her to the hospital, and we found out that she had what's called a wet stroke, which basically means that it's a bleeding stroke. It continues to bleed, and it was in her brainstem, which controls most of her motor functions. So she when I was able to get over there and see her, she was obviously paralyzed throughout almost all of her body. She was unconscious for a couple of days, and just because of the pain and the location of the stroke. But eventually they got her off meds, and she became unconscious very frequently, but it was mostly due to just the stroke, and that also affected her ability to breathe. She could no longer breathe on her own, so she was on a ventilator. So this happened Tuesday. We were kind of watching things. The doctors hinted quickly that a lot of people just really don't come out of this type of stroke, so we were all planning for the worst. I was kind of holding off with work, just kind of trying to fill out what was going to happen. Didn't Obviously I wanted to see her, but didn't want to get down there just to see her in a bed. I didn't want to see her that way. I figured if she was going to pass very quickly, I might as well save it for the weekend where we might have a funeral. Well, things started kind of progressing a little bit differently, and so I headed over on Tuesday. And Jess said as long as I took Afton, because Maggie's only this Tuesday, so in a couple days she'll be 4 weeks old. But she's like, if you take Afton, Afton's the hard one, and I can handle all the rest of the kids. So me and Afton drove down with my mom and dad, and we spent the last 3 days there. I went and saw her, and then spent some time together. Um, saw some family. I obviously training for that big hike that me and Mark have for the John Muir Trail. So I threw Afton in the carrier pack, and we went and hiked Lone Mountain, which was fantastic. Um, and then we went. Well, obviously, as soon as we got there, we went over and saw her first, and it's a bit shocking, nonetheless, to see her in the state that she was, especially such a woman that I have come to love and adore. I feel like a chunk of my love for the arts, musicals, music in general, things like that, comes from this side of my family, and specifically from my grandma Judy. So eventually after seeing what was going on and all the family got together, they knew she was not going to be coming out of this, and they had tried taking her off the ventilator for about 15 seconds, and she did not breathe on her own, and so they knew she was going to pass. One thing that was really interesting was to watch Grandpa. He got everybody together for a family council, all of the children, and we Skyped in Aunt Marie out in North Carolina. But besides that, everybody was there, and Sean, except for Sean, he was running a bit late with his flight. And Grandpa was very much so championing to that they had an advanced healthcare directive in place. They had a power of attorney and a will in place, and him and Grandma had talked about this many times that that they would, in this given situation, would want to be let go. It was interesting to see some of my aunts and uncles have apprehension to that. They were obviously very concerned about her being in pain, and if they were to take her off the ventilator, that it could be a horrific experience of her like gasping for air. And I remember Aunt Marie saying she didn't want to see the pain in her eyes, and that was a big part that they were really worried about, which I could definitely understand that. So what happened was they came to a decision though, because Grandpa was like, we want this to happen. We don't want her to have to stay in this situation. And I read a book recently. It was called Being Mortal by Atul. I know it's Atul, and then I can't remember his last name, but it had a lot. The whole entire book had a lot to do with geriatrics and kind of the history of um, how our country and medical system has evolved with geriatrics as far as people in the last minutes of their lives, or last weeks or days or whatever. And me and Jessica have been very ahead of the curve, I feel like, on this. I mean, when we went to Hawaii back in, I think it was 2008, we made sure to get our will and all of this way in place to make sure nothing would happen. But it really, the book helped to put into context as well that you really want to make sure that you explain to those around you what your desirable state of living is, and if you cannot meet or exceed this standard of living, that it is your wish to be let go. And Grandpa and Grandma had apparently had those conversations, so that was great. So we got a lot of family in there. We got all my side of the family in there. Everybody, even Mark came down, and then all Matt came out from San Francisco, and we all were in the room. We had a family prayer, and the on Saturday morning, which was just yesterday, and we had a prayer. And one of the best parts was we sat around and sang songs. We sang some of Grandma's favorite songs. I remember "Consider the Lilies." She made my parents do the instrument song, which is always a fan favorite. And then we sang a couple of Sound of Music songs, and Edelweiss was the one that really kind of struck me, and I was really composed until that moment. I started to cry pretty good, and obviously seeing everybody around me crying, but just a beautiful song, and it was an endearing and touching moment to have us all in there in the room at the exact same time. And we sang, and then we all stepped out of the room, and the doctors came in. They administered some morphine to make sure she kind of, passed out, but also didn't feel any type of pain. And they took the ventilator off, and she took about 5 minutes to pass. But she passed remarkably smooth, and it made me think that this is really how ideally I would want to go. This is ideally how I would want my family to remember me, and that it was such a peaceful experience for everybody. Um, anyway, just wanted to say that, and that it was a great experience to be together. I look forward to the funeral here next week, and we love you all. We'll see you.